Statement by the Department of Defense, June 27, 2021. At President Biden's direction, U.S. military forces earlier this evening conducted defensive precision airstrikes against facilities used by Iran-backed militia groups in the Iraq-Syria border region. And they're talking about how they needed to do this to protect U.S. military forces occupying the region. They don't mention illegally. And they say that they're at the invitation of the government of Iraq for the sole purpose of assisting the Iraqi security forces in their efforts to defeat ISIS. And they're talking about the so-called Islamic State. Absolutely everything about this message is wrong. This is the U.S. actually attacking militia forces that are on the payroll of the Iraqi government. The Iraqi government is paying these militias because they are the ones helping Iraq defeat ISIS. Very similar militia groups are also operating in Syria, also fighting ISIS and al-Qa'ida and al-Nusrah, and all of the other extremists that are being armed and funded by who? By the United States. So this is the U.S. pretending to fight ISIS by bombing the people that are actually fighting ISIS. They're claiming that they're in Iraq to help the Iraqi government fight ISIS. And yet, here is a New York Times article. Baghdad condemned American airstrikes on Iranian-controlled militias that have been harrying U.S. operations in Iraq, fearing an escalation. So the government that invited the U.S. to stay in Iraq is complaining about this strike. They're saying it's a violation of their sovereignty. And is the U.S. really being invited to stay in Iraq by the Iraqi government? Does the Iraqi government have a choice? The U.S. invaded Iraq in 2003 and they never left. So they weren't really given a choice in the matter. They could tell the U.S. to leave, but they're not going to. There have been statements from different parts of the Iraqi government telling the U.S. to leave, as the U.S. refuses to leave. And here they are attacking militia groups on the payroll of the Iraqi government, claiming that they're doing this to protect Iraq and to protect U.S. forces in Iraq, who they claim are fighting ISIS. And I want to just point out that the U.S. is trying to create some sort of legal justification for its continued military presence in the Middle East. It's absolutely illegal. And here is a Guardian article from 2004, so right after the U.S. invaded Iraq. Iraq war was illegal and breached UN charter, says Annan. Annan, they're referring to Kofi Annan, the Secretary General of the United Nations, and he declared explicitly for the first time last night that the US-led war on Iraq was illegal. Of course it's illegal. He said that the invasion was not sanctioned by the UN Security Council or in accordance with the UN's founding charter. Of course. It is absolutely a violation of international law. It's a violation of U.S. domestic law. It was completely illegal. And again, it was predicated on a deliberately fabricated claim that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction. Now, I say that the U.S. is arming and backing extremists, including al-Qa'ida, al-Nusrah, and the Islamic State. And that's not me just making this claim. This is admissions from the U.S. itself that they're arming and funding these extremist groups. I want to point out this 2016 article. In leaked email, Clinton claims Saudi and Qatari governments funded ISIS. And if you come down here, the Clinton email states, we need to use our diplomatic and more traditional intelligence assets to bring pressure on the governments of Qatar and Saudi Arabia, which are providing clandestine financial and logistics support to ISIL, which is just another way of saying the Islamic State, and other radical Sunni groups in the region. So this is the then U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton blaming the arming and funding of these extremists. They're blaming Qatar and Saudi Arabia. But then there's this New York Times article from 2017, behind the sudden death of a $1 billion secret CIA war in Syria. And they admit that CIA supplied weapons had ended up in the hands of rebel groups tied to al-Qaeda. So it was the US and also Qatar and Saudi Arabia and Turkey and Israel and the United Kingdom and France. So all of these nations were involved in this. There were no moderate rebels. The US and its allies were always backing extremists from the very beginning. And I've pointed this out before, and I'm going to continue pointing this out. This was from 2007. This is an article by Seymour Hersh. It's titled, "The Redirection. Is the administration's new policy benefiting our enemies in the war on terrorism?" And at this point, they're still talking about the Bush administration. And there's this very key quote right here that I'll repeat over and over again. "To undermine Iran, which is predominantly Shia, the Bush administration has decided, in effect, to reconfigure its priorities in the Middle East. In Lebanon, the administration has cooperated with Saudi Arabia's government, which is Sunni, in clandestine operations that are intended to weaken Hezbollah, a Shia organization that is backed by Iran. The U.S. has also taken part in clandestine operations aimed at Iran and its ally Syria." Again, this is 2007 that this article was written. "A byproduct of these activities has been the bolstering of Sunni extremist groups that espouse a militant vision of Islam and are hostile to America and sympathetic to al-Qa'ida." And of course, al-Qa'ida's rise was driven by the US and its allies backing and arming militants in Afghanistan during the 1980s to fight the Soviets. So this was a creation of US foreign policy, and it's deliberately perpetuated by US foreign policy. In 2007, Seymour Hersh was warning people that US foreign policy was driving extremist groups, using them to fight this proxy war against Iran and also Syria. This was before the Arab Spring was ever a thing. By the time the US engineered Arab Spring unfolded in 2011, they already prepared these extremists ahead of time. It was already being prepared. And then that's why by the end of 2011, not even a year into the conflict, the US itself was talking about how al-Nusrah, this al-Qaeda franchise in Syria, completely dominated the opposition. Where were they getting weapons and supplies from? How come when you looked at maps of their strongholds, they're always along the borders with Turkey and Jordan and Iraq that the US at the time was also still occupying? It was because they were a product of what was a proxy war, not a civil war. The US was fighting Damascus through these extremist groups that it and its allies were arming and funding. And that's still going on to this very day. They are keeping these militant groups alive in case the opportunity presents itself to use them against Damascus or Baghdad or anyone else in the region they feel the need to use them against. And in the meantime, they're using their continued presence as a pretext to stay in the country. And as you see, the only people that they're actually bombing are the militias that are out there trying to uproot these extremists completely. So I thought it was important to point this out when we hear about these airstrikes. It's very important to remember the context of all of this and why the US is there, and the fact that they are only there because they are trying to finish regime change. This is why no matter what the situation is on the ground, they will find an excuse to stay there. They will stay there until they accomplish their regime change or until the situation in the region changes to where it is physically impossible for the US to maintain a military presence. If you thought this video was useful, please like and share it. Think about subscribing. It's free to do, and it helps the channel grow. Think about clicking on the bell icon, then you'll get a notification every time I upload a new video. Check the video description for all the links that I discussed in this video, as well as for ways you can help support my work, like by becoming a Patreon member. Through Patreon, you can support my work month to month. There's some extra content there for my supporters, and there are also channels of communication we can use to share ideas and kind of build a community around this work. And to everyone who has been helping me in absolutely every way, thank you so much for that support. Without it, I could not do this. And as always, thank you for watching.